Kim Hewitt, the Vice President for the Office of Institutional Equity, and Abbas Ben Mamoun, the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement on Duke's first ever climate survey, which included staff in addition to faculty, and in which they mentioned the next steps that would include a retreat for academic leaders in 2022. Despite having to move this retreat online on January 4th at the last minute due to Omicron, I want to acknowledge the work of Sherilyn Black, the Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, Carolyn Mackman, Assistant Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, Abbas, and others who helped really provide a unique tapestry for school leadership teams to reflect on and analyze the data that was presented to Council in the fall from the 2021 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Survey. And should a future Council meeting agenda this spring permit, we may have Kim and Abbas back to discuss further the data after the Racial Equity Advisory Council has completed their analysis this spring. Okay, so we're going to start as we normally start with the approval of the last Council minute meetings from November 18th. The minutes from this last meeting were posted with the agenda. And unless someone has a correction, and since we are on Zoom, we will consider these approved. Okay, thank you. The minutes are approved. And just a few reminders, when we get to the Q&A, the challenge as always is, please raise your hand so we can call on you. And if you have a question, when you're called upon, please still state your name, department, or school for the benefit of everyone who is on this meeting, but also it helps us with transcription of the meeting minutes. And attendance is being taken, with your names that are listed on Zoom. So that is being taken care of. We are going to begin today with a presentation from Kyle Kavanaugh, who will be joined by Provost Kornbluth regarding Omicron and the start of the spring semester. Before I welcome Kyle Kavanaugh to our meeting and have him begin his presentation regarding the start of the year, I want to take this opportunity to recognize his tireless and ongoing work since the spring of 2020 in helping Duke adjust its operations to the pandemic environment that we've all had to endure and adapt to. And if you missed earlier the news this month in the Duke Chronicle or on Duke Today, Kyle will retire this year in September. Many of you may not realize just how much time and effort Kyle has contributed, in addition to others who have been instrumental in ensuring that Duke has been able to operate in as close to as normal fashion as possible over the last 20+ months. So Kyle, thank you. We are grateful for all you do, and also for your responsiveness to the many emails that inundate your inbox on a daily basis. And so with that, I want to, yes, lots of applause. With that, I want to turn it over to Kyle, and I know Rose will be you have someone helping with the slides.
I do. Erica, thank you. I feel enormously embarrassed at the moment, but I will push through that. But that was very kind of you, and thank you. And I feel compelled to really start. And I think everybody here knows, but there is an army of men and women that have been working on this tirelessly for 2 years. And I do want to give 2 shout outs before I start. First, in the staff world, we have bus drivers and dining staff and custodial staff. They don't have the option of ever being virtual, right? They are here with us every single day, and they have been nothing short of phenomenal. The second is I have the luxury of talking to many, many people around the country about this. I wouldn't want to be doing this work anywhere else but here. We have such phenomenal people in the faculty ranks that, to me, is the Duke difference. That's what allowed us to navigate this so well. And the last thing I would say, there are just two groups of people, both in employee and occupational health and in student health, that have just been doing yeoman's work through the holidays. And we've leveraged a lot of that learning, especially in our health system, that we don't talk that much about the impact on the health system, that has allowed us to, I think, navigate the first couple of weeks here in January so well. So Rose, if you bring up those slides, we'll dive into this. The way that we're going to do this or set it up is I've tried to just provide some context and some background and update on data. And then I'm going to turn it to Sally, who's going to serve as kind of a moderator for our questions. So we could go right into the first slide here. And the first one is basically just a stage setter to say that if we look over the last couple of months, and I'll show you some data here regarding the sequencing information that we have, but we did see a significant change going at the end of the calendar year, and especially in our health system. And that's not a unique story of what's happening with health systems around the country, whereas we're seeing increases in hospitalizations, it's also coming at a time where we have seen our all-time high in terms of impact on the workforce. So in the middle of December, our numbers in our health system workforce were going from 200, 400, 600, 1,200 employees within the course of a week. That really required some dramatic and rapid change on protocols. And we'll talk a little bit about those, on contact tracing, on isolation in alignment with what the CDC has recommended. So having a health system and going through that actually allowed us to leverage that learning and apply it to the university. I think it is important to recognize, especially in our School of Medicine and Engineering and other areas, that our research labs have really continued to operate at a very high level and having no reported transmissions in our labs, which is really, really significant. We've continued to work, and some of them are here in the audience. And I just want to again say thank you so much to our faculty modeling team. My education has been straight up in terms of my learning, and they have helped me understand a great deal of this and have just been tremendous in kind of digesting and making sense of the data. We're continuing to look at information coming out on a global level, especially as we talk about Omicron and we look at what's happened in South Africa. We've looked at the UK. We have some encouraging signs that we'll talk about on a national level, certainly at the state, and we continue to be in, which is also, I think, a really good benefit of Duke, that we have such a strong relationship with Durham County Public Health, and that has paid dividends for us as well. We are having standing meetings, so they typically happen once a week with all of our peers. I'm sure everybody is aware of how the semester ended for some of our peers up in the Northeast, and we were watching that and learning from that. There are a lot of practices that are being adjusted. If you look at the large publics here in North Carolina, certainly UNC, NC State, but if you look at some of the privates up in the Northeast, they are out, for example, of the isolation game, and basically saying if a student tests positive, they're either, if they can, they go home or they isolate in your room. We haven't gone there yet. I don't anticipate us doing that, but it's a signal of a lot of changes that are going on in terms of practices. And then we're staying in very regular contact with all these folks, okay? So here's the first 2 weeks. I'll let Sally maybe expand on, there was some questions about the virtual nature of the first 2 weeks, which really were less about concern of the health status, certainly an area that we're going to be concentrating on, but more around anticipated high numbers and could we pull off all the logistical support for this. So as anticipated, we did see high numbers in both our employee population and our student population. We'll talk a little bit about the breakdown in these numbers, but the overwhelming majority of these people are asymptomatic. In these numbers here that we haven't had a single individual out of this group that's been hospitalized, thank goodness. So there is a question about how do we continue to navigate through this with a lower level of severity, okay? More than you want to know, but I'm proud of myself that I can actually pronounce some of the things that are on here. So all of our positives now, not only for the university population of our employees and students, but also any of the patient data is now coming into this. This is just the employee population. If you look at the blue and the purplish, that was kind of when we were in the alpha space in terms of the first origin of some of the variants we were seeing. That kind of light yellowish there, if you remember last spring, we had a little case of what was referred to as the California variant, and then everything moved into Delta going through the summer, and it stayed Delta all the way through. As we got into the end of November, beginning of December, is when we started seeing Omicron. Just got the updated report this morning, and it is running about 98+% Omicron. So there's no secret as to what variant. I also want to mention Alejo Escobar. I don't know if any of our faculty on here know Alejo. So Alejo is a postdoc who's been doing all this work, and I just want to recognize all of his efforts in this area. Okay. So a couple of learnings and a couple of shifts that we've made here. So we did plan and have conducted entry testing on all returning students. We did ask that students get a pre-arrival test, but as you may know, as we got in close to the end of the calendar year, beginning the new year, it was very difficult in some places around the country to actually get a PCR test. So it was strongly recommended, but we didn't stop students from returning. So we did conduct entry testing on everyone, and we are now into about a week and a half of surveillance testing. We tested 21 days in a row, and now we'll start to kind of move back into surveillance starting next Monday. On a positivity rate, we're running about 5 to 7% on entry testing, and about 1 to 2, maybe a little bit higher, 2.5% on surveillance testing. Those numbers are important because right now, we're kind of managing all the logistics. So everything, although people are literally working around the clock, it's all holding on at the moment. So I mentioned earlier, it's about a 50-50 split, and those who are reporting symptoms are labeling those as mild symptoms, okay? There was significant changes towards the end of the year on CDC guidance as it relates to isolation and relates to quarantine. We've adopted those. I mentioned earlier about the large numbers of employee cases that we had in our health system. We actually put this practice in place in the health system going back towards the end of November, beginning of December. So that's been operational there as for nearly 2 months now. We adopted that in our student population, and that is working quite well. Our isolation capacity is holding up. We have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. If we got into a really, really high level, we're not there yet, we would then go to where our peers are if we needed to isolate in place, but we're not there yet. Another change that I'm sure everybody is quite familiar with is in the recommendations around masking. We have had a number of faculty engaged in this. We did, as we did last year, provide through the schools any teaching faculty that were interested in having a N95. If you're familiar with the N95s, they have kind of a head strap. They're actually fairly uncomfortable to try to wear for a long period of time. And that's what led to looking at the KN95s. We've acquired quite a few of these. We're working to get more of those. We distributed these, the KN95s first to all our residential population. And then working with Mary Pat and team, we're continuing to distribute those to off-campus students as well. And we'll continue to make these available through the semester, okay? Last two things, contact tracing was so important to us in the early stages. It has become an irrelevant tool because of volume and also because of the speed of the incubation period and then the recovery period of Omicron. So that is something that's not going on as aggressively as it has been. And I'm really thrilled this is just kind of hot off the press, that our employee numbers are now, this includes the health system, this health system and university together, that we're now north of 30,000 and we're now north of over 9,000. We actually think There's just an issue of getting our students to actually submit their information in there. So we have an incredibly high vaccinated and now boosted population. So I put on the head of this about living with COVID, and I think that's what we're trying to do. I am personally thrilled that our faculty are back in the class this past week, and I just hope it's been a great experience for you. With that, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Sally to moderate any questions that there may be.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Yeah, why don't we just open the floor? As Kyle mentioned, there are a number of folks here that we could refer questions to. I'll field what I can. Prasad.
Thanks, Sally. My name is Prasad Kasipatla with the Nicholas School. I have two related questions. My first question has to do with the modeling activities, and I wonder whether Duke has done and will release results related to what projections of case numbers will be under various scenarios. For example, allowing attendance at basketball games, having large classes with all the people on campus. I mean, are there modeling that Duke has done under various scenarios that project cases? And I guess my second question is more philosophical. I get the sense that Duke has shifted in the title, Living with COVID, to kind of trying to tamp down transmission to saying transmission is going to occur, we're just going to live with it. And I wonder if Duke has actually adopted that policy, and if so, how we're accounting for things like long COVID, which we don't understand fully, things like that.
So Prasad, in a moment, I think Steve Haas is here that I can ask the modeling question, but let me just comment on your second question for a moment. I think living with COVID more implies the recognition that it's not going away anymore soon, and going away anytime soon that easily. It is not to suggest that we're not taking every possible mitigation strategy. And I think, foremost on concerning that is what Kyle mentioned in terms of boosters and masking. And, I cannot state strongly enough that upping our masking game here is critical. We have not even seen transmission from patients to doctors in the hospital when the doctors keep on their N95s. So that's really the name of the game. So saying we're going to live with COVID is not implying like, oh, just let it rip. It's implying that we need to accept the fact that, magical thinking is not going to make it go away, and we have to think of long-term coping strategies. Let me ask Steve Haas, who I believe is here to comment on the modeling question.
Thanks, Sally and Prasad. Yes, so we are certainly updating models with new parameters for Omicron. So many things change with Omicron, including a shortened incubation period, as Kyle suggested, as well as a shortened duration. And as well, we've seen increases in transmissibility of this variant. So we're plugging those in and exploring various scenarios in terms of mitigations in the same way that we did last year, but on a more broad campus scale, not at the scale of particular events, in part because we would be guessing at various parameters for an event like a basketball game. So we are exploring all of the outcomes of the new things that Omicron brings, but doing it in the same way that we've done in the past and not specifically for events.
Raphael.
Raphael Valdivia, Molecular Genetics and Microbiology. Maybe I missed this, but what is going to be the changes on testing strategies? Seems to be that what we used before, pooling, is not going to work when our rate starts going beyond a certain level. And so what is going to happen from that angle?
Yeah, so actually Tom Denny, who's really been the champion of our testing strategy and protocols, actually here as well. So Tom, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So you're correct. Pooling is challenging at some of the rates that we've had. What's helped us is we have some clinical platforms in our lab. We have two components of our lab, our research side and then our clinical side. Our clinical side has some very large instruments that collectively can do about 2,000 samples per day. So what we have been trying to do to manage this is we recognize that the entry-level samples coming in were the highest. And we did a little pilot testing early on, and we realized that that was the highest percent positive. So we started running those as singletons, not pooling them. And then as we started to transition into surveillance testing, I think Kyle showed about a 2.5% number we're hovering around. It's challenging, but it's manageable. And so for an example, I think yesterday we did 3,900 tests, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that ballpark. Well, we had normally when we would close out our day, we would aim for 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon to close out all the tests from the pools that had to be split. Yesterday, I think we closed out at 9 o'clock at night. So it's stretching the system, but we're still able to manage it. If we got higher than that, anything north of that number, it gets more and more challenging with a turnaround time that's reasonable.
Thanks, Tom. And thank you for all you've been doing. I know this has been around the clock effort throughout this pandemic, and it's made a huge difference for us. Cam.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. The first one is short. I'm wondering if we're considering mandating the KN95. Many of the students, at least in my class, a third show up with a cloth mask, which is really unsatisfactory. The second question, I'm wondering if the administration is willing to make a long-term investment in the health and safety of our faculty, our students, our staff, by increasing the quality of the filtration in our classrooms and other parts of the university. So I did some research, and most of the Duke filtration is MERV 13 standard. And this filters about 50% of the particles from 0.3 to 1 micron, which is not effective against a high R factor Omicron or potential future variants. The lowest grade HEPA is 99.7% effective at 0.3, not the range of 0.3 to 1, but at 0.3. So I'm wondering if the university would consider doing that, and perhaps even if you can't do that, in the short term, provide portable HEPA units for faculty going into the classroom.
Thanks, Cam. So let me comment first on the KN95 question. So we've been in very active conversation about this, and I guess the real answer is, we would consider mandating it if we can source enough KN95s for all of the students, because it's not really fair to mandate for because we have students with all sorts of income ranges, accessibility, et cetera. We are working very hard on that. Mary Pat McMahon may want to comment on that, as she and I were speaking about this just an hour or 2 ago. Mary Pat?
Sure. Hi, everybody. We've got a message going out right now, sort of it's drafting and getting approved to all undergrads, strongly encouraging wearing the KN95 in class. Off-campus students have been able to pick them up when they come to testing this week. There's no testing tomorrow because of the storm. The on-campus students found them in their rooms when they came into campus this semester. This has all been sort of put together since the 10th, as Kyle noted. So we're on it. If we can get to a point where we have the supply, our team's also ready to have them available and refresh student supplies weekly. So we're getting close to being able to say, if we say they're required, that we can make it so that all the students have them. But we're just about there.
So presumably this would be graduate and professional students as well.
Yeah.
So we'll do our best on that, Cam. That's a totally reasonable goal. In terms of the filtration, I don't know if Kyle, if those discussions have been had with facility folks or Daniel, or if we can have those conversations. I think, that's a different question from whether we can provide portable filtration. So I don't know if Kyle or Daniel want to comment on that at all.
Yeah, I could start. Thanks, Cam. I think the long-term issue based on our experience over the last 2 years is absolutely on the table, is taking a look at kind of the way that the institution's structured, and does it fit into the renewable plan? So it is one of the variables that's on the table. We haven't distributed those HEPA filters everywhere, but we've used them in some high traffic areas, like in the testing sites. They're actually in there. So I would have to take a look at what our potential might be to actually deploy them more broadly. So we could certainly look into that.
Thank you. Sarah?
I had a question about how the university is thinking about people with children under 5. So obviously children under 5 are not yet able to be vaccinated, and daycares and preschools are closing left and right for, 5 days, 10 days, 2 weeks. And I'm wondering, kids under 5 usually can't take care of themselves. And so I'm wondering, you can't just plop them in front of the TV when they're 2. And so when you're teaching a class or if you're on a Zoom. And so my question is how the university is thinking about that for staff who are generally required to come in. Are they required to use their sick days, or have additional days been given? And have you thought about those kinds of issues particular to, all employees who have young children, and not to mention not vaccinated? So in some, while young children tend to have mild cases, we really have no idea what the long-term consequences are.
Yeah, so I'll just comment. I'm going to kick this over to Kyle in terms of the staff question, but just comment in terms of faculty. One thing, we've said that I really want to emphasize is, if a faculty member has to go to remote instruction because of short-term issues, daycare closes, and, could be short-term, could be longer term, on and off and on and off, that is completely understandable. We want the default to be in person, but if someone gets stuck with temporary transient issues, we understand that logistically, absolutely. Kyle, I don't know what's happening in the staff space here. Perhaps you can comment.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for your question. It is one of the more knotty challenges in this whole issue that has developed, without a doubt. We have tried to be by unit as flexible as possible there and as supportive. Early on, I think you may know that in the staff space, we actually created kind of COVID leave. So if your individual was kind of impacted, that it didn't impact their accrued time. We haven't applied it yet into this scenario, but I think it's something for us to take a look at.
Thank you. Betsy.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much, Kyle, for the presentation and all you've done. I appreciate it more than I can express. My question is twofold. One is because of the speed of transmission of Omicron, I was wondering if you've considered reporting more frequently than weekly on the dashboard. And then my second question is a little bit more pedantic, but on the cumulative reports or results, I'm wondering if the denominator should be tests or should be individuals.
Right. So, actually, this is something that Steve may want to comment on. In my own gut feeling is in the more rapid transmission, it actually makes the daily sort of reporting or more frequent reporting even less actionable because of the speed that things are moving through in terms of, what you can draw from the data. But Steve, can you possibly comment on some of that, Steve Haas?
Yeah, no, I agree, Sally. I think whether or not it's actionable having that information on a daily basis is questionable. In terms of the denominator, I would say that the reporting that we've seen recently, especially for entry testing, is a true prevalence coming in. So that's a per person positivity rate and reflects what we're seeing nationally as the students come back to campus. I think it's also worth saying that what we're seeing on surveillance, because we hit everybody once, I think we got everybody once a week over the last 2 weeks, that the denominator again is a per person. And so it's comparable to what we're actually reporting for entry testing. And we have seen a significant drop in positivity once the students are here and we're testing them by surveillance. And so that suggests that the entry testing that we're doing has effectively knocked down the numbers as the students return. And as we've seen through most of the pandemic, I think Duke is enjoying a lower number of positives on campus than you would likely see off campus.
Thanks, Steve. Prasad, do you have another question? You're mute.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on Betsy's comment. This goes back to the letter to the Chronicle that I wrote. I think the weekly numbers are really not actionable because things are moving so fast. What happened last week, few days ago, really doesn't mean anything right now. I think one of the things I'm hearing from younger faculty who are not tenured and stuff, are saying they're concerned about asking for permission to go online and stuff like that. And I think the daily numbers will provide some context for those kind of requests. And I think if you have daily numbers, we can individually make decisions about risk. Having numbers from last week really are completely unactionable. I think they're just numbers, I think. So I just wanted to.
So a couple comments about that. First of all, I would argue that the daily numbers are no more actionable than the weekly because they're changing so rapidly that we don't actually expect people to be making day-to-day changes in-person, remote. It's very difficult to know also how those cases are distributed through the student body, et cetera. We've certainly seen with time foci of infection based on, a party, et cetera. That's not relevant to each, faculty in their classroom. So that's one thing. I'm concerned that I'm more concerned about what you say about junior faculty being worried about asking for a needed accommodation. I don't know how you all can help us get the word out that, we're trying to be as flexible as we can. I will also say that, obviously everyone knows about the tenure extensions, et cetera. We've also added, clock extensions. Just the other day, we decided to also add, we're adding additional language so that people can explain how COVID slowed down their work, et cetera. So I hear what you're saying. I just think we need to lean against sort of that, urban legend that there's going to be some particular repercussions on the junior faculty, because really, we're all trying to keep in person, keep our students taught, but we're not unreasonable when it comes to personal circumstances, particularly the kind that Sarah alluded to of, look, they just sent my kid home from school. What am I supposed to do? We understand that. And, I would implore folks here to please help get the message out to their junior colleagues that, we're trying to work with people as much as possible.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, and I want to be respectful of Kyle's time because we have asked him a lot with presentations to Academic Council, but I also want to thank Tom and Steve for showing up today to also answer our questions. I really appreciate all of you, the entire COVID modeling team. Thank you for being here. With that, we are now moving to our next agenda item. And this is about an update on Duke Kunshan University that will be held in executive session. And so what that means is that members of the press, I need to ask you to leave Zoom. And likewise, those who are not members of the faculty, we must also ask you to leave the meeting as